Welcome to Forgotten Civilization, where we journey deep into the hidden chapters of ancient America, unearthing the stories buried beneath centuries of sand, stone, and silence. In today's episode, we travel to the scorching deserts of Arizona to uncover one of the most astonishing engineering feats ever created on American soil. A vast network of canals built not by modern machinery, but by the hands of an ancient people long before Columbus, long before the Founding Fathers, long before written history itself. These were the Hohokam, the masters of desert water. What they built over 1,000 years ago still shapes modern Arizona today. This is not just archaeology, it's the rediscovery of America's first engineers, the ones who made the desert bloom. Long before the modern cities of Phoenix and Tucson glimmered under the desert sun, this vast region was an unforgiving wilderness, a place where summer heat could kill, where rainfall was rare, and where only the most resilient life could endure. Yet, against all odds, an ancient people looked at this harsh land and saw possibility. Around 300 BCE, they began to carve the first channels through the desert sands, guided not by machines or modern maps, but by an astonishing understanding of the land's subtle slopes, the rhythms of the rivers, and the language of water itself. These people were the Hohokam, whose name, meaning those who have vanished, was given centuries later by the Pima people, descendants of the land they once ruled. The Hohokam were not warriors or empire builders like the Aztecs to the south. They were innovators, scientists, and dreamers, a society whose genius was measured not in monuments of stone, but in miles of running water. Their domain stretched across the Salt and Gila River valleys, where they constructed a complex irrigation system that spanned more than 500 miles, some of the largest and most sophisticated in the ancient world. Long before the Romans filled aqueducts across Europe, the Hohokam were already redirecting rivers, taming floods, and turning desert dust into fields of maize, beans, and cotton. Imagine the scene. The year is around 700 CE. The air is hot and dry, the ground cracked from months without rain. But as the dawn breaks, the first light catches the shimmer of water winding through carefully dug channels, cool, clear, and alive. The people gather at the edges, directing the flow with clay gates and wooden tools, ensuring every field receives its share. To the casual eye, it's a simple act, irrigation. But to the archaeologists who uncovered these networks, it was nothing short of an ancient miracle. The canals were not random trenches. They were masterworks of precision, engineered with gradients so subtle that the water could flow for miles without stagnation or overflow. Some canals stretched nearly 20 miles long, with main channels branching into smaller distribution lines, a living web of hydration pulsing through the desert. The engineers calculated flow rates, slope, and soil absorption, all without written language or measuring instruments. Their knowledge was oral, experiential, passed down through generations like sacred wisdom. This innovation transformed the Salt River Valley into one of the most fertile agricultural regions in pre-Columbian North America. Villages flourished along the water's edge, and trade networks expanded in all directions. Shells from the Pacific coast, obsidian from Mexico, and turquoise from the southwest passed through Hohokam hands. The desert that once whispered death now sang with life. But the canals were more than engineering. They were spiritual. To the Hohokam, water was not merely a resource. It was a divine essence, the lifeblood of the world. Each irrigation ritual carried meaning, a blend of practicality and prayer. They believed the rivers were living entities, whose moods had to be respected and whose gifts had to be honored. Water ceremonies marked planting and harvest, blending astronomy, agriculture, and religion into a single cosmic rhythm. Archaeologists have discovered artifacts that hint at this worldview. Pottery painted with swirling designs resembling flowing water, petroglyphs of rain serpents and spirals carved into rock faces overlooking canal routes. These images, combined with their careful management of water, reveal a society deeply attuned to balance, between human need and nature's limits, between survival and reverence. And perhaps the most extraordinary part of this story is not just what they built, but how long it endured. The Hohokam canal systems operated continuously for over 1,000 years, a feat almost unimaginable in a world where modern infrastructure decays in decades. Even today, parts of modern Phoenix's irrigation network follow the exact same paths carved by Hohokam hands over a millennium ago. Beneath highways and suburban neighborhoods, the bones of their ancient canals still lie buried, silent but unbroken, a testament to ingenuity that never truly vanished. Yet the Hohokam themselves did. By the 1400s, their great canal cities stood empty, their waterways dry. What caused their disappearance remains one of the greatest mysteries in North American archaeology. Was it drought, flooding, conflict, or something more complex? A slow unraveling of a civilization that had mastered nature for too long. But that is a mystery we will explore in the later parts of this story. For now, we stand at the dawn of Hohokam achievement, when desert became garden, when necessity gave birth to genius, and when water, life itself, became the greatest monument of all. Water. It was the difference between life and death in the ancient Sonoran Desert, and the Hohokam understood that better than anyone. Once their canal systems began to take shape, something extraordinary happened. Villages that had once clung to the riverbanks began to spread outward, forming clusters of settlements connected not by footpaths or roads, but by flowing water. The desert had been conquered, not through force, but through patience, precision, and profound knowledge of the land. Over time, these waterways transformed the Hohokam from scattered farmers into one of the most organized and prosperous civilizations in North America. The canals were the arteries of their society, carrying not just water, but prosperity. Along their banks grew fields of maize, beans, squash, and cotton, the three sisters of native agriculture, plus a fourth crop that would define the Hohokam's legacy: cotton. Long before European contact, Hohokam weavers spun cotton thread and crafted textiles so fine that traders from far regions sought them out. Their cotton garments became a symbol of both wealth and ingenuity, proof that the desert could produce luxury as well as life. This transformation allowed their population to swell. By around 1000 CE, the Hohokam heartland, centered around what is now Phoenix, supported tens of thousands of people. Villages evolved into towns, and towns into regional centers. Archaeologists have identified hundreds of these communities, each carefully positioned along canal routes, suggesting a central authority or cooperative network that managed water rights and maintenance. Imagine the coordination required: miles of canals needing regular dredging, gates to control flow, and distribution systems to ensure fairness. It was a level of civic engineering that mirrored the complexity of ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. Yet all of it existed in what we now think of as a barren wilderness. Each canal community likely had its own leaders, perhaps elders or specialists, who oversaw irrigation schedules, organized labor, and performed ceremonies to ensure the blessings of the river spirits. But what stands out most is not hierarchy, but cooperation. The Hohokam appear to have built a culture rooted in shared responsibility, a social contract between humanity and nature. The people who lived upstream had to think about those who lived downstream. Water was communal. It wasn't owned. It was borrowed, used wisely, and returned to the earth. Their society grew around this philosophy. Hohokam villages were designed in harmony with the environment. Clusters of adobe houses arranged around central plazas where rituals and gatherings took place. The plaza wasn't just a meeting space, it was the beating heart of communal life. Here, stories were told, crops were traded, and the celestial cycles were observed. The Hohokam were keen astronomers, their ceremonial mounds and platform structures aligned with the solstices, tracking the sun's movement to mark planting and harvest times. Their mastery of both earth and sky gave them control over two worlds, the physical and the spiritual. Archaeologists have uncovered astonishing evidence of this dual mastery in the form of ball courts, oval-shaped depressions surrounded by raised embankments. Over 200 have been discovered across the Hohokam region. These were not battle arenas, but places of ceremony, trade, and unity. The ball courts connected the Hohokam culturally to ancient Mesoamerican traditions, suggesting far-reaching trade routes and shared spiritual practices that stretched all the way to the civilizations of Mexico. Here, communities gathered for festivals, exchanged goods, and strengthened the bonds that held their watery kingdom together. The canals also shaped their art and identity. Hohokam pottery evolved into something deeply expressive, red-on-buff designs depicting flowing lines, birds, and serpents, all symbols of life and movement. Their art mirrored the flow of the canals, never still, always alive. Meanwhile, petroglyphs carved into desert stone recorded both everyday life and cosmic visions. Spirals representing time, snakes for water, and hands reaching toward the sun. The Hohokam left behind no written language, but their symbols spoke volumes. They saw themselves as part of the natural cycle, not masters of it, but participants in an eternal exchange. And yet their mastery over water came with risk. The desert, though tamed, was never truly conquered. Each generation faced the delicate balance between abundance and disaster. Too much rain could flood the canals, washing away years of labor. Too little, and the fields would crack and die. Maintaining the system required relentless work, constant dredging, rebuilding, and adaptation. For centuries, they succeeded, even as the desert tested them again and again. But in this golden age, between 900 and 1150 CE, the Hohokam stood at their peak, a network of thriving canal cities that rivaled anything north of Mexico in sophistication. Their canals fed tens of thousands, their fields stretched for miles, and their art captured the heartbeat of the desert. To modern archaeologists, it's clear. This wasn't just a civilization that survived the desert, it was one that thrived in it. Imagine standing on a ridge overlooking the Salt River Valley in those days, the sun dipping low, painting the landscape in copper and fire. Below, 1,000 small fires flicker as families gather by their homes. The faint sound of water moving through the canals hums in the air, the pulse of a living machine built by human hands. You'd see not barren land, but an empire of earth and water, America's first engineered paradise. The Hohokam achieved what few ancient societies ever did. They made one of the world's harshest environments not just livable, but beautiful. Their canals didn't just carry water, they carried hope, connection, and a deep respect for the forces that made life possible. But as every civilization learns, even the most advanced systems are fragile. The same canals that brought them life would, in time, also bring them challenge. And as the centuries rolled on, the delicate balance the Hohokam had mastered would begin to falter. Environmental change, social pressures, and the unforgiving desert itself would conspire to test the resilience of America's first engineers. But that is the story of the coming fall, and the mystery that still lies buried beneath the cities of modern Arizona. By the height of their power, between the years 900 and 1150 CE, the Hohokam were no longer just desert dwellers. They were the architects of an empire without walls, a civilization united by water. Across the Salt and Gila River valleys, their canal systems fed a constellation of thriving settlements that pulsed like living organs, each connected by the arteries of flowing water. This was the golden age of the canal cities, the pinnacle of human ingenuity in pre-Columbian North America. Imagine standing in the heart of one of these cities, perhaps the great settlement we now call Snaketown, the Hohokam's capital near modern-day Phoenix. The air is thick with the scent of maize and smoke, the chatter of markets echoing across wide plazas. Traders arrive from distant lands, bringing seashells from the Gulf of California, obsidian blades from the Sierra Madre, and turquoise from the mountains of New Mexico. In return, the Hohokam offer fine cotton textiles, ceramics, and food, gifts of a land transformed by water. The city hums with activity. The canals, shimmering in the desert light, feed every field and every household. Children play near their edges, while farmers adjust the clay gates to balance the flow. Women shape pottery by hand, their fingers tracing designs that mirror the curves of the rivers. Elders sit beneath mesquite trees, watching as life, steady, rhythmic, and harmonious, flows before them. The Hohokam lived close to the earth, but their world was anything but primitive. Archaeological evidence reveals a sophisticated urban design. Their settlements featured clusters of pit houses, circular or rectangular dwellings partially sunk into the ground to stay cool in the blazing heat. Over time, as their population grew, They began to construct multi-room compounds made of adobe and caliche, forming the first true neighborhoods of the Southwest. At the center of many Hohokam towns stood great platform mounds, elevated structures made of earth and clay, some rising 2 or 3 stories high. These were not defensive fortresses, but sacred and administrative spaces. From atop these mounds, leaders and priests oversaw ceremonies, agricultural planning, and perhaps even canal management. The mounds were symbols of order, a visual reminder that water, earth, and people must remain in balance. Then there were the ball courts, the oval-shaped ceremonial arenas that marked the heart of their communal life. These courts, some as long as 150 feet, were the stage for ritual ball games that echoed those of Mesoamerica. But in the Hohokam world, these gatherings were far more than sport. They were diplomacy in motion. Communities would come together for festivals that lasted days, celebrating fertility, harvest, and the gods who governed water and the sun. Musicians played reed flutes and gourd rattles as dancers painted in red and white pigments moved in time with the rhythm of drums. The desert, so often seen as silent, came alive with sound and color. Trade and ceremony were intertwined. Ball courts were often built along major trade routes, acting as social and spiritual hubs. When neighboring groups arrived, they brought more than goods. They brought stories, songs, and ideas. The Hohokam's openness to exchange helped shape a culture that was both distinctly local and remarkably connected. Their pottery, art, and architecture absorbed influences from faraway lands, even as they maintained their unique identity as the people of the canals. What made this civilization truly extraordinary, however, was its stability. For nearly 1,000 years, the Hohokam sustained their way of life without kings, armies, or conquests. There are no signs of large-scale warfare in their ruins, no fortifications to speak of, no mass graves of conflict. Instead, cooperation and balance appear to have been the foundation of their endurance. Their survival depended not on domination, but on community, on the shared maintenance of the water that sustained them all. Their art reflected this deep connection to nature. Mimbre's pottery of neighboring cultures told stories through imagery, but Hohokam ceramics sang through design. Abstract patterns that seemed to move like rippling currents, birds that soared across wide bowls, serpents that slithered like streams. Many pieces were used in ceremonies, offered as gifts to the gods of rain and fertility. Others accompanied the dead into the afterlife, as if to guide them along the rivers beyond this world. The Hohokam spiritual life revolved around cycles: water, sun, and earth. Their priests studied the stars, noting when shadows fell across markers at solstice and equinox. The sun told them when to plant and when to harvest. To them, time was not linear but circular, as constant as the flow of the canals that nourished their fields. In this world, every drop of water was sacred. Every channel carved into the earth carried not only life but meaning. It's no coincidence that later native groups, like the Pima and Tohono O'odham, preserved Hohokam legends of the people who made the desert bloom. These stories, passed down through centuries, describe a time when the ancestors worked with the river, not against it, when harmony governed all things. But harmony can be fragile. Beneath the prosperity of the canal cities lay the seeds of change. The population was growing, and the land, after centuries of cultivation, was beginning to show signs of exhaustion. Canals required constant upkeep, and floods sometimes destroyed entire sections overnight. As new branches were dug and older ones abandoned, the delicate balance that held the system together began to stretch thin. Yet, for a brief and brilliant age, the Hohokam stood unmatched. Engineers, artists, and visionaries who reshaped the desert into a living landscape of abundance. When we think of great civilizations, we often picture the stone temples of Egypt or the aqueducts of Rome. But here, in the sands of Arizona, another miracle had unfolded, quiet, humble, and enduring. A civilization built not on conquest, but on the understanding that the earth gives only as much as we respect it. The rise of the canal cities marks one of the most extraordinary achievements in American prehistory, a chapter that reminds us that progress is not always loud, and that greatness can flow like water, unseen, persistent, and eternal. For nearly 1,000 years, the Hohokam Canals had given life to the desert, feeding crops, connecting communities, and sustaining one of the most advanced societies in ancient North America. But as the centuries passed, the same forces that once brought abundance began to turn against them. Nature, time, and the delicate balance they had so carefully maintained began to shift, slowly at first, then suddenly, with devastating force. What had been a world of harmony began to crumble under the weight of its own success. The Hohokam had always lived at the mercy of the desert's extremes. Floods and droughts were familiar cycles, and for generations they adapted, rebuilding, redirecting, surviving. But around the 13th century, something changed. Climate data drawn from tree rings and sediment cores reveals a period of severe and prolonged droughts, followed by unpredictable flash floods. The same rivers that had been their lifeline became unpredictable and violent. The Salt and Gila rivers flooded beyond their banks, ripping through canals and farmlands. The water that once sustained life now carved destruction through the valley. Each disaster forced rebuilding, but every reconstruction came at a higher cost. Maintaining the sprawling network of canals required coordination, labor, and resources. As floods grew more frequent, sediment built up in the channels, choking their flow. The careful gradients that once allowed water to travel for miles were thrown off by erosion and debris. Fields dried out or drowned, and the once proud engineers of the desert faced a growing truth. Their system, magnificent as it was, had reached its limit. But the collapse wasn't only environmental. The Hohokam civilization depended on cooperation, on the shared belief that water belonged to all. When the rivers failed and harvests weakened, that belief was tested. Archaeologists studying late Hohokam sites have found signs of social strain, abandoned villages, burned compounds, and defensive structures that hint at conflict. It's possible that neighboring groups, also struggling to survive the climate shifts, began to compete for resources that were once plentiful. The social harmony that had bound their world together began to fray. Trade, too, began to fade. The great ball courts that had once hosted festivals and commerce fell silent. The exchange networks that had brought shells, obsidian, and turquoise to the Hohokam heartland began to break down. The ceremonies that once united distant communities became rarer, then vanished altogether. Isolation replaced connection. The canals that had once linked the valley in a living web of cooperation now marked boundaries between struggling groups. Some scholars suggest that the Hohokam might have tried to adapt, building smaller, more manageable canal systems, moving to higher ground, or shifting to dry farming methods. But the desert is relentless. Without consistent water, crops failed. Without crops, communities dissolved. By the 1400s, the great canal cities that had thrived for centuries were mostly abandoned. The earth reclaimed what had been carved from it. Canals filled with sand, homes crumbled to dust, and the desert fell silent once again. What makes the fall of the Hohokam so haunting is how complete it was. Unlike some ancient societies that left behind towering ruins, the Hohokam vanished quietly. No epic wars, no grand collapse, just a slow fading, like the receding of the rivers they depended upon. When the first European explorers arrived centuries later, they found little more than fragments, potsherds, petroglyphs, and the faint outlines of canals running through the Arizona desert. Yet, even in their disappearance, the Hohokam left behind echoes of resilience. Oral traditions of the Akamel O'odham, Pima, and Tohono O'odham peoples, descendants of the same desert lands, speak of a great flood that destroyed the world of the ancestors. In their stories, the people who had mastered the waters lost favor with the gods because they forgot their respect for balance. Whether myth or memory, the tale reflects an ancient truth, that every civilization, no matter how advanced, must live in harmony with the forces that sustain it. Some archaeologists argue that the Hohokam didn't simply vanish, they transformed. Their descendants may have dispersed into smaller mobile groups, adapting to the changing environment and carrying fragments of their culture with them. The pottery styles, irrigation techniques, and agricultural knowledge of later native groups in the region bear traces of Hohokam influence. suggesting that while their cities fell, their wisdom endured. Still, walking through the remains of a Hohokam canal today, one feels an almost eerie sense of presence. The dry channels twist across the desert floor, still visible from the air, ghostly fingerprints of a civilization that once made the desert bloom. Beneath the modern sprawl of Phoenix, many of these ancient canals still exist, buried just below the surface, their paths guiding the very water systems that sustain the city today. In a poetic twist of fate, modern engineers rediscovered and reused these same routes when designing the Salt River Project canals in the early 20th century. The Hohokam's vision of water, flowing through the heart of the desert, continues to shape life in Arizona a millennium later. Their story is both a warning and an inspiration. It reminds us that progress, no matter how advanced, is fragile when nature shifts. But it also shows that human innovation can endure, not through conquest, but through understanding. The Hohokam mastered the desert not by fighting it, but by learning from it, by working with its rhythms. In their rise and fall lies a timeless lesson about the delicate balance between humanity and the world we depend on. As the sun sets over the Sonoran Desert, the golden light washes over the ancient canal beds, now silent but eternal. The wind whispers across the land, carrying with it the faint memory of flowing water, the heartbeat of a vanished world. The Hohokam may be gone, but their spirit, the spirit of the desert engineers, remains written in the very soil they once shaped. The desert remembers. Though centuries have passed since the last of the Hohokam walked the banks of the Gila and Salt Rivers, their legacy still flows quietly beneath the modern cities of Arizona. Few of the millions who drive through Phoenix each day realize that they are following the footsteps of an ancient civilization, a people who, with nothing but hand tools and ingenuity, engineered the foundation for everything that exists here today. The freeways, suburbs, and water canals that feed modern Arizona are built upon the very bones of Hohokam innovation. Beneath the pavement lies 1,000 years of history, a ghostly network of channels that once turned a barren land into a paradise of flowing life. When American settlers arrived in the mid-1800s, they were astonished to discover the remnants of massive canals etched into the desert floor. To their surprise, these were not the works of recent tribes, but of a civilization long vanished. Early engineers, inspired by what they saw, mapped and restored some of the ancient Hohokam waterways, realizing they could still carry water with astonishing efficiency. Those ancient lines became the foundation for Arizona's modern irrigation systems, including the Salt River Project, which continues to sustain millions of lives today. The past, it seemed, had already solved the future. Modern archaeologists now regard the Hohokam as some of the most advanced hydraulic engineers in the pre-Columbian Americas. Their achievements rival those of the ancient Egyptians or Mesopotamians, though they remain largely unknown outside scholarly circles. The canals they built spanned more than 500 miles and supported one of the largest continuous farming systems in ancient North America. What Rome built in stone, the Hohokam built in earth and clay, structures that endured through centuries of wind and flood, proving that mastery doesn't always require grandeur, only precision and harmony. But beyond engineering, the true legacy of the Hohokam lies in their philosophy, their intimate relationship with the land. They didn't force the desert to yield. They listened to it, studied its moods, and learned how to live within its limits. They understood that survival in the Sonoran Desert required cooperation, not only between people, but between humanity and nature. That wisdom, simple yet profound, remains a guiding principle for those who live here today, even if most never know its source. Walk along the modern canals of Phoenix at sunset, and you can still feel the echo of that ancient rhythm. The water glides past concrete banks where ancient clay once carried it. Birds circle overhead as they might have 1,000 years ago. Somewhere beneath the surface, shards of Hohokam pottery still rest in the soil, fragments of bowls, tools, and painted vessels that once touched the hands of those who first brought life to this place. To archaeologists, each fragment is a whisper from the past, each canal a chapter in the story of a people who refused to surrender to the desert. Museums across Arizona, From the Pueblo Grande Museum in Phoenix to the Arizona State Museum in Tucson, now tell the story of these desert engineers. Excavations have revealed villages, ball courts, burial sites, and artifacts that illuminate how deeply the Hohokam understood balance. Their art, so graceful and fluid, captures their connection to water, animals, and the cosmos. Their irrigation systems demonstrate not just technical skill, but a profound sense of community. And their disappearance, while mysterious, offers a powerful reminder of how fragile civilization can be when the environment turns. Yet the Hohokam's legacy is not one of loss. It's one of endurance. The descendants of these desert dwellers still walk this land, the Akamel O'odham, the Tohono O'odham, and other native peoples who carry ancestral memories of water, survival, and respect. To them, the story of the Hohokam is not a legend of disappearance, but a lesson in continuity, a cycle of renewal where life persists, even after silence. Their ceremonies, songs, and stories keep alive the spirit of those who once carved rivers from stone. Today, as Arizona faces its own water crises, droughts, overuse, and rising heat, the lessons of the Hohokam feel more urgent than ever. Scientists and engineers study their canal alignments and water management strategies, marveling at how well they understood the terrain. Modern sustainability experts point to the Hohokam as a model for how humans can adapt to arid environments without destroying them. The desert, once again, demands balance, and perhaps by looking back, we can find the wisdom to move forward. In the quiet hours of dawn, when the sun spills over the red mountains and glints across the canal waters, it's easy to imagine the voices of the Hohokam carried on the breeze, the soft rhythm of digging sticks, the laughter of children near the water, the chants of elders thanking the river for another day of life. The desert may seem empty, but it is alive with memory. The canals still flow, and with them, the story of America's first engineers continues to move, just beneath the surface. They may have vanished from sight, but the Hohokam never truly disappeared. Their spirit flows through every drop of water that crosses Arizona, through every blade of green that rises from its soil, through every person who dares to build and survive where the odds say they shouldn't. In a land where water is life, their legacy is eternal. And so, as the modern world races forward, perhaps it's time we pause and listen to the wisdom of the desert, to the silence of the canals, and to the echoes of a people who mastered both time and terrain. The Hohokam story is not just ancient history. It's a mirror, a reflection of what humanity can achieve when we choose to live in harmony with the earth. In the heart of the desert, the canals of the Hohokam still whisper, not in words, but in water. They remind us that even the harshest landscapes can bloom when guided by wisdom, unity, and respect for nature. The story of the Hohokam is not a tale of what was lost, but of what remains, a blueprint for survival written in earth and water. As we walk through the modern streets of Arizona, the past flows quietly beneath our feet. These canals, once carved by hand, became the arteries of an empire and now feed millions in the modern world. They are proof that progress and preservation can coexist, if we only remember how to listen to the land. This was the ancient canals of Arizona, America's first engineering marvels. Another chapter in our journey through the forgotten civilization, where every ruin, artifact, and mystery tells the story of who we were and who we still might become. Soft ambient music fades in, desert wind, trickling water, distant drums. If you enjoyed this exploration into America's ancient past, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join us tomorrow as we uncover another lost world hidden beneath the sands of history. Forgotten Civilization, uncovering the truth buried beneath time.